Well, here we are.
Ready to go.
Panel back, team ready. Yeah. Tackle some hard questions and look at some issues that we see in our daily life. Something that you might want to ask the pastor. Remember, you can always submit to us your hard question that you'd like for us to look at. We always want to hear from you. You can do it by email. You can do it by a telephone call. Just call us or email us. Now, we'll put the information on the screen so you know how to do that. Well, let's go through our panel. Always on our far right, holding down the end, Dr. William Glaze, Senior Pastor Bethany Baptist in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Pastor Pete Giacalone from Rainbow Temple in McKeesport, Pennsylvania. New to the panel, Reverend Brian. We're so glad you're here, Senior Pastor.
Great to be here.
At Macedonia Church in Pittsburgh. And then our new face, sitting in on the far end for Pastor Chuck, not a pastor, but a mover of pastors, organizer of pastors, and kind of a pastor of pastors in many ways. Sam Rohr, he's the president of the American Pastors Network here in, where's the home base? It's
just outside Philadelphia.
Outside of Philadelphia. Yeah. So here we go. Let's get into it. Let's get into our first hard question today. You know, it's election season. And not kind of there. We're kind of getting into the mode. And it's confusing to see all these different candidates jumping in. Kind of confusing to understand it. When you talk to your people, your congregates, and they come to you, how do you tell them how to choose what kind of candidate that they need to, or do you even get into that? Do you even get into that topic at all? Maybe not necessarily from the pulpit, maybe not. How do you do it?
To me, I'm gonna jump in real quick. To me, I think moral is always the issue, Don. I beg people, don't vote your pocketbook, but morals. Where does this individual, male or female, where do they stand on morals?
What do you mean? What's morals mean? What do you mean?
Righteous morals. Abortion to me is a very big topic, and if the head candidate believes in abortion, then he lost one vote from me. That's for sure.
You know, I would say, and I heard somebody say this before. You know, I'm not for the donkey or the elephant, but I'm for the lamb. You know, so whatever the Lamb of God, you know, that's the party that I stand for. But you know, I would say a couple things. First, you know, going back to what Pete said, you know, I think it's important to understand the heart of God. And the heart of God is in the scriptures. And, you know, I think, you know, because now we begin to weigh things, right? Like, you know, like I'm a pastor in the inner city. So, you know, a lot of my issue is on the poor and social justice. Right. Okay, now you got an issue like abortion, homosexuality. Now you begin to weigh these things out, you know, and you got to ask yourself, which one is more weightier to God? Right. And so that's what I try to get the people to do, because you know, one person will say, well, you know, why are you worried about babies that are unborn when you got people here that we can't take care of? So, I mean, that's an argument that I hear. So now I got to, as a pastor, I got to help people navigate through all that. So now you got to begin to, which issues are more weightier? And I would say at that point, you study, you try to find the heart of God, and you pray, and you let God lead you, you know, to where you need to go.
Yes, let me jump in here. One of the thoughts that I have is always pointing people to where our true hope comes from. Because in the debates, there's a chance that we may get lost in, oh, I have to choose one side or the other. But essentially, our hope is in the Lord. Amen. And so while we are weighing the sides and weighing the different issues, we've always got to be pointed back to our hope is in God, and no Democrat, Independent, or Republican will ultimately be our hope.
No, we have to keep our hope in God. Sam, you've got political history, service history, and you work with pastors. How do you weigh in here?
Well, I think what we try to weigh in on is this, is that God's people, by and large in this country, do not understand. Actually, most of the pastors in the pulpit across America do not understand how God has laid out the whole concept of authority, and that He's established the individual, self-government, and the family, and the church, and civil government. And that in civil government, God raises up nations. There's a sovereign plan of God that's much bigger than us. And He raises up those who are in positions of authority. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. Now, in our country, we have the ability to be a part of that. Most countries of the world do not have any real opportunity. We do, by God's blessing. But if God's people don't know what righteousness in a candidate looks like. And they are not viewing them in terms of their character and their integrity. And instead, like Israel, chose Saul because he looked tall,
That's right.
rather than God winning to David because he had a heart after God's.
That's right.
Until we think as God's people like God thinks, we will continue to elect people to office who may smile nice, but who, in the end of the day, do not understand what it means to be a minister of God, Romans 13, and therefore they do not do that which is righteous, and therefore the people mourn. That's where we are. So we have a spark. We have
The people's
responsibility.
choice, and the people loved it so.
Yeah.
That is Sam, well said. Well said. You know, today's Constitution Day, by the way, a very obscure holiday, but it's Constitution Day because the Constitution is a very important document in our world. You don't hear much about the Constitution because it gets put aside, and sometimes the Supreme Court decides that it's not really valid. But Constitution, playing off of Sam, what you just said, the Constitution, I believe, is a divinely anointed document. Created by men, certainly, but divinely anointed for the purposes of this experiment that we call America. And your point to, if we don't understand it from the biblical perspective, if we get down to the micro perspective and vote our pocketbooks, then we're not really playing into the hand of God.
No, sir.
Does the government ever become our God?
I hope not. If we look at Egypt, if we can compare the idea, once government becomes your God, you now become a slave to your government.
That's right.
Well, and I would say that, you know, for some people, the government is their God.
Yes, sir.
You know, if you're dependent on the government, you know, for your needs, then they, you know, I mean, every day we get up, what do we say? God, help me.
Yes, sir.
Look, God, give me strength to serve
Yes,
you.
sir.
God,
Yes, sir.
provide for my
Yeah,
needs.
yes, sir.
Right?
At my church.
Right, yeah. So I'm dependent on God. But, you know,
Totally.
there's some people every day that, you know, at the end of the month or whatever, and, you know, and I'm not trying to be negative, but they're looking for that check from the government.
Yeah.
And so I think that, you know, our government has fostered a society
Yes, sir.
of dependent people.
Well, that started way back with JFK. He began what did he call it? The something society, the Great Society, and it became the mindset. And you know, we got to take a little responsibility here.
Yes, sir.
The
Right.
church stepped back.
Yeah, and didn't fulfill its mission.
Right, and when the church stepped back, who's taking care of the needs?
Government.
Somebody has to do it, so the government stepped in.
And Don, I got one quick question here. I'd say, you know, when we say government can become God, it is always the tendency of a government or leaders who are not dependent upon God for themselves to become God.
Yes, sir.
But we must look, I believe, within the church of God first and ask all of ourselves the question of this: who do we really trust in?
Right.
Where is our trust? Our bank accounts, because it's going to disappear.
Right.
Is our neighbors, or who may it be, because anything other than full dependence on God Himself is idolatry, and that's what God judged Israel for. I think we need to ask, as God's people, in whom do we fully trust? Because if we're guilty of idolatry, we're in big trouble too.
Well, where is our allegiance? Thank you, gentlemen, for taking on a hard question and giving us good answers. A good answer. The solution is, on an individual basis, let's put our faith and trust in God. We'll come back at another time and talk about what faith is and what unbelief is, because there's a big difference. You have to put your faith and your trust in God. Now, if the government service, they're there to serve us.
Right.
And so when we look at people who we're going to put in leadership, let's look at those people through the perspective of the Lamb. Pastor, I think that's a wonderful analogy. Not a donkey or an elephant, but the Lamb. Amen. Let's look at that candidate through that perspective, and does he or she line up with the Word? And if he does or she does, then will they lead us back into God's path? Or if they don't, then we're in real trouble. Thank you for your time. We're glad that you tuned in for this hard question, and we'll be right back.